Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Oregon Ducks, Dan Lanning, sounding like they're getting extremely aggressive in the transfer portal with some massive news coming out Friday morning that the number one player in the transfer portal, former five-star defensive lineman Walter Nolen from Texas A&M, making his first visit as a transfer portal recruit to Eugene, to the Oregon Ducks, to Dan Lanning. Massive news coming out there. I want to talk about Walter Nolen, a couple other defensive line prospects, talk about the quarterback situation. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a very sincere thank you to the Oregon Duck fans. This is a program that I absolutely love talking about. You guys know how I feel about Dan Lanning and what he's doing in Eugene, but the amount of support you guys show consistently, I can't tell you how much that means. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. It sounds like it's going to be a busy next couple of days, and we're going to be doing our best to keep you guys as updated as possible with all the roster moves happening up for the Oregon Ducks. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas, and without further ado, let's get into this one. And you got to start with what is one of the bigger pieces of news that we've seen in all of college football, not just for Oregon Duck fans, and that is five-star defensive lineman Walter Nolen making the trip up to Eugene to check out the Oregon Ducks. This is a guy that right when he hit the transfer portal, all the heavy hitters going after Georgia, Tennessee, Texas. And what does that say? That Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks are getting the first crack at Walter Nolen. It's absolutely massive. And for Oregon Duck fans specifically, when we made our wish list a couple days ago, talking about some top targets and position groups the Oregon Ducks need to address, we said difference makers on the defensive line would need to be a priority, right? You take a look at that Pac-12 championship game. It wasn't good enough up front. And you look at moving to the Big Ten, like at being physical at the point of attack, having difference makers on that defensive line is a massive priority for Dan Lanning. And you look at Dan Lanning and his defensive philosophy as a whole coming from Georgia, that's what his bread and butter is. Dominating teams at the point of attack and having those kind of difference makers. And if you're an Oregon fan, like you know it's going to happen. Like Dan Lanning has a proven track record of getting guys right on that defensive line. You look at the young talent on this team, guys like Mateo Yu, you're feeling really good about it. But Walter Nolen coming in for the first year in the Big Ten, this is arguably the best interior defensive lineman in the country in 2024. A guy that you're going to see in a ton of mock drafts as a top 10 prospect. You take a look at what he did as a second-year player for Texas A&M, 8.5 TFLs, 4 sacks. He's a guy that when you're that big and that twitched up, there's a reason he was a top 3 prospect coming out of high school. He's kind of a different animal in terms of the size, in terms of the quickness, in terms of the play strength that he has. And going into year 3, that's where you normally see the biggest jump for guys on that defensive line. You have to be absolutely thrilled if Walter Nolen is wearing an Oregon Ducks helmet heading into that 2024 season, especially as you make that move to the Big Ten. And on the defensive line, it sounds like things are looking up because Jordan Burch, I'm not going to report any news or whatever. I don't know I'm not in touch with Jordan Burch per se, but you're starting to hear some rumblings that Jordan Burch is a guy that's thinking about coming back as well. And you combine Jordan Burch, who's a former 5-star guy, and you see the 5-star traits that Jordan Burch has. Walter Nolen, one of, if not the best interior defensive lineman that we'll see in 2024. You're feeling really good about where Oregon is on that defensive line. And that isn't even mentioning a guy like Mateo Yu, who's going to be making his jump to that second year where you start to see some development. This defensive line, if you add Walter Nolen, you're feeling really, really good about where that sits heading into the Big Ten. The next guy I want to talk about, and that's the quarterback situation. A couple of days ago, we talked about some quarterback options for the Oregon Ducks, and we focused in on Cam Ward and Dillon Gabriel. And I'll tell you this, you're probably not going to find a bigger Dillon Gabriel fan than me in terms of evaluating quarterbacks I'd want in the transfer portal. Now, between Dillon Gabriel and Cam Ward, I think those are probably the 2 best quarterbacks that are available in the transfer portal. You see 24/7 Sports, the 8th best quarterback. Couldn't disagree more with that. When you're going and looking for quarterbacks in the transfer portal, how many guys have the stat line that I'm about to read to you? Throughout Dillon Gabriel's career, 14,000 passing yards, 125 touchdowns, 26 interceptions, 33 added rushing touchdowns on a 63% completion percentage. He is one of the most productive quarterbacks at the college level that we've seen in the history of this sport. And then you look at what he did in 2023 at Oklahoma, a 70% completion percentage, 3,600 yards, 30 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. You're looking for a quarterback that's a plug-and-play guy that's going to make this offense and elevate this offense. I mean, it's Dillon Gabriel. And how lucky are Oregon fans to have Bo Nix the last 2 years and then have the potential to go and get a guy like Dillon Gabriel, who, again, I'm putting as one of the best college quarterbacks in the country. And you can argue all day about what his draft stock looks like in terms of being an NFL quarterback. Fine, that's a different conversation. But in terms of being a college football quarterback, I don't think we've seen many better quarterbacks in the country than Dillon Gabriel. I mean, week 4 of this season when he led our Oklahoma on a game-winning drive to beat the Texas Longhorns, a Texas Longhorns team that is playing in the college football playoffs, he was top 5 in Heisman voting. This is a guy that is truly one of the better quarterbacks that you see in college football and kind of a proven commodity. And what excites you about Dillon Gabriel is you kind of know what you're getting. Cam Ward's really exciting too. Don't get me wrong. Cam Ward ends up in Oregon Duck. Like, I'm going to be very excited about that one. There's a lot of meat left on the bone for Cam Ward in terms of his development. But you're getting Dillon Gabriel, and you know you're getting a very high-quality quarterback that's going to elevate this offense. And we've talked about it. This Oregon offense, there's going to be a line out the door for quarterbacks to play for this Oregon offense after what they just saw with Bo Nix the last 2 years and the development that he had as an Oregon Duck. The next guy I want to talk about, and kind of sticking on the offensive side of the ball, and that same idea that, I mean, if you're a transfer, if you're a top transfer on the offensive side of the ball, quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and you're looking at where do you want to play your last couple of years of college football to compete for a national championship, to elevate your NFL draft stock, I don't know how many more offenses there are than the Oregon Ducks in terms of destinations you want to go to. And we're looking at the best wide receiver in the transfer portal. That is Juice Wells from South Carolina. And it sounds like Oregon's making a push for him, right? When he originally hit, as a Tennessee and Texas kind of emerging as those spots. And within the last 24 hours, the Oregon Ducks making a move. And that kind of speaks to where Oregon is as a program. Like, there is nobody off limits for the Oregon Ducks to go after, whether it's on the offensive side of the ball, whether it's on the defensive side of the ball. If Troy Franklin goes to the NFL draft, I mean, Juice Wells would be a guy to replace Troy Franklin as that true wide receiver one. And if you guys have listened to me talk some SEC football heading into this year, I peg Juice Wells as the best wide receiver in that SEC conference. And obviously he got banged up, didn't play much in 2023, but you go back to the 2022 year, 68 catches, 928 yards, 6 touchdowns, truly one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. Getting into kind of what I love about Juice Wells is that he's a box checker, right? There's not many things that Juice Wells cannot do. He's got a big frame, 6'1", 210, can run really clean routes, create separation, can work vertically down the field. But what I love most about Juice Wells, he's an absolute force after the catch. And you look at where Oregon is having the most success with their wide receivers, it's scheming their guys in space and letting them do work after the catch. Juice Wells has a running back body, and this dude is built. And so you get him the football in space, he's going to make plays. Juice Wells, I think it'd be a very attractive spot for him. If I'm Juice Wells, I'm certainly taking a look at Oregon. If I'm the Oregon Ducks, and I have the ability, and you have the ability to replace Bo Nix and Troy Franklin, and just kind of run it back to some different guys who I think have very similar tool and skill sets. What a blessing. And if Juice Wells comes to Oregon, I mean, he is going to have a massive year for the Ducks, and they don't need a ton of help at the wide receiver room. I'm a very big fan of some of the young guys that they have. But in terms of getting a veteran guy who's done it at the highest level in the SEC, this would be a massive, massive get for the Oregon Ducks. Now, I want to flip to the defensive side of the ball to talk about the last two guys. And you look at some big priorities for the Oregon Ducks. It has to be in that back end of the defense. I mean, losing guys like Addison and Bridges to the transfer portal, Evan Williams and Stevens out of eligibility. Kyrie Jackson, I would think, goes to the NFL after the year he had. You're looking for some guys in the back end. You go to Nyland Green, a guy that Dan Lanning recruited to Georgia when he was at Georgia. This is a guy that he hasn't played much at Georgia this year, and that's one of those situations. And there's a couple different situations. You get some guys who are maybe just not that good, and that's why they're not playing. You look at Nyland Green's situation. The Georgia Bulldogs are about to put 4 or 5 defensive backs into the NFL draft, and those guys are going to be top 150 picks. I mean, guys like Malachi Starks, Kamari Lassiter, Tyke Smith, that secondary room for the Georgia Bulldogs was by far the best in college football, and I don't even think it was close. And so Nyland Green only playing 94 snaps for the Georgia Bulldogs, I don't think that's an indictment on him and what he can or cannot do. I think that's more of just saying this Georgia team was loaded, and it was hard to find playing time. And you look at Nyland Green, I mean, another box checker, 6'1", phenomenal frame. When he did play, faced 4 targets, only gave up 1 catch. This is a guy that's a very good football player that Dan Lanning has relationships with. And in the modern recruiting era, you're looking for keeping those relationships are massive, because you might miss on a guy in the high school ranks and then he hits the transfer portal. You come back around and grab him up. Dan Lanning got him to come to Athens. Now he's in the transfer portal. This would be a massive body to add to the back end of this Oregon defense. Last guy I want to talk about, and this one is a fun one, Jamond McCoy gets an offer from Oregon as a true freshman. Played, over 400 snaps, faced 47 targets, only gave up 27 catches, 8 pass breakups, 2 interceptions. As a true freshman in the Pac-12, which was loaded with wide receiver talent and quarterback talent, you're not getting a second-year college football player here, because he has the experience of a guy that's been in college football for multiple years. Yes, he's young. He's going to have plenty of eligibility for the Oregon Ducks, was a true freshman last year. But how impressive Jamond McCoy was as a young player in the Pac-12 was next level. So you're getting a guy that's not just young. He has a lot of experience and was really, really good for Oregon State. I don't think this is a coincidence that right when he hit the transfer portal, when Jonathan Smith left, Dan Lanning and that Oregon staff offered him within hours of his name hitting the transfer portal. Would be another massive get for the Oregon Ducks. And I think we're starting to see something special. And what I mean by special is there's no player, there's no area of the country that is off limits for Dan Lanning and this Oregon Ducks team. They are swinging one of the biggest sticks on the recruiting trail, whether it's at the high school ranks, whether it's in the transfer portal. These are a few names that are popping out as massive targets for the Oregon Ducks, and every single name we listed. It's not crazy to say that the Oregon Ducks can land these guys. Plenty other guys that the Oregon Ducks will be looking at. We'll continue to update y'all as we get more information. But as we sit right now, it's looking like the Oregon Ducks are going to get aggressive. And again, they're in a really good spot to land a lot of these names. Appreciate the Oregon Duck fans for rocking with the boys as always. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And hopefully within the next couple of days, maybe even hours, we have a little emergency episode to do to talk about Dillon Gabriel coming to the Oregon Ducks. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.